Welcome to Reflections with Amanda DeRocher, a New View Advice mini-sode series. Hey, beautiful soul. Welcome to Reflections. I'm Amanda DeRocher, and this is where I share stories and reflections from my own healing journey, specifically my journey healing from sexual violence. This week, I am talking about the topic of uncomfortability when it comes to sexual violence. I found that it was so hard to talk about because I was constantly making people uncomfortable with this topic of sexual violence, sexual assault, and rape. So this week, I'm exploring that idea of what it felt like to make people so uncomfortable all the time. And I believe society's still very uncomfortable with this topic. I was actually watching a YouTube video this week where they were talking about a celebrity in the news who has rape charges against him right now. And they beeped out the word rape every time they said it. And personally, as a rape survivor, I think that this is a disservice to survivors. When people beep it out, they make it like it's unspeakable. In my experience, that contributes to the shame and that contributes to feeling like this is something we can't talk about. And what I have found throughout my healing journey is that it is so important to talk about. So I want to jump into this week's story, but I'll talk a little bit more at the end. That time I made people uncomfortable surviving sexual assault. Nice tits, purred a man at a bar as he closely leered at my chest. You can fuck off, I snapped back. He looked at me with ice-cold hatred. Stupid bitch. He spat at me and then stalked off. I had watched this man make women uncomfortable all night. He followed them around, made vulgar remarks, and got too close for comfort. All the women had been polite enough. They avoided eye contact, scurried away, or laughed politely until they found an excuse to leave his presence. Someone needed to tell this guy to fuck off, so I did. I felt empowered until I turned around. My friends all gaped at me and then said the following. Amanda, you can't say that. That was harsh. You should take it as a compliment. I went from anger to empowered to overwhelmed with shame in the span of 30 seconds. Why was it my responsibility to play nice with a predator? Why was I the bad guy for speaking up for myself? Why was others' comfortability more important than mine? At this time in my life, I was constantly making people uncomfortable. A few months earlier, my memories returned of being sexually assaulted in my childhood. It was one of the most overwhelming, disorienting, and confusing experiences I have ever gone through. I had moved across the country to sunny Los Angeles with dreams of being an actress. I thought that in no time I would be on TV living out my dreams. Instead, the universe had other plans for me. About a year into pursuing my Hollywood dreams, my repressed memories of being sexually assaulted as a child returned. When my memories returned, they returned in layers. It's a hard process to explain, but it was like I had opened Pandora's box and I couldn't get the box closed. Suddenly, images, sensations, emotions, and memories I had long shoved down in my psyche were coming to the surface of my awareness with no sign of stopping. I suffered from night terrors, and I spent all my waking hours reliving the past while simultaneously grappling with my shattered reality. Because this was an all-consuming process, I wanted to talk about it all the time. I wanted to talk about it because it was all I thought about, but also because it was crazy-making. I had only heard of one other person with repressed memories, and their experience was different than mine, so I judged myself in my process. I was searching for someone outside of me to validate me. I needed to know others believed me, that they didn't think I was crazy, and that I wasn't going insane. I was desperate to know I was going to be okay. The more I talked about it, the more I saw how uncomfortable people became. These are some of the responses I received when trying to share for the first time what happened to me with friends and family. Ew, that's disgusting. You shouldn't talk about that. I don't remember it that way. You're wrong. Stop crying. You need to get your shit together. And another painful response. No response. The times I have shared the most vulnerable things I have survived and been met with a blank stare or a shift of conversation has also left me feeling like I was stabbed in the heart with a knife. I was also surprised by the amount of people who said, "Me too." Wait, how did I not know how many people were sexually violated as children? Unfortunately, it wasn't like the movies where you say, "I was sexually assaulted," and then the friend smiles at you and says, "Me too." You both hug and cry and feel better knowing you're not alone. No, many of these people got very angry with me for bringing it up. I had accidentally triggered them and made them very uncomfortable. Others told me to not talk about it and that you learn to stuff it in a box and forget about it. The problem with that was that I had forgotten about this for 20 years. I didn't want to shove it back down. I wanted to be free of this, but I had no idea how. I tried going to therapy at this time, but was met with professionals who were unqualified to help me deal with what I was going through. I still live with the pain from receiving the following responses from professionals at the time. Why are we still talking about this? You should be over this by now. I don't believe this happened to you. And my personal favorite, you should have your boyfriend pretend to rape you. That will help you move forward. As I kept reaching out for help and was met with painful, ignorant, and unhelpful advice, I began to feel like I was too much, a belief I had picked up in childhood. As I processed healing from sexual violence and repressed memories, I saw how I was traumatized as a young girl. I exuded so many classic trauma responses, but since no one knew what happened to me, I was labeled things like overly dramatic, difficult, and too much. I carried these beliefs far into my adulthood, and as I processed being sexually assaulted and raped, I also began to see how devastating these experiences had truly been. There had been a massive ripple effect on every area of my life. I thought everyone would be excited for me that I had finally begun to understand why I was the way I was. No, people were not excited. Instead, they were uncomfortable. My process of healing was like peeling back the layers of an onion, and repressing child sexual assault was only the beginning of my journey healing from sexual violence. I also had to process from healing from gang rape and strangulation in my teen years, but by the time these memories came up to be processed, I had already learned that people were uncomfortable with me and my story. I knew it was too much for people, but I couldn't help but wonder how no one had enough empathy to think about how all this trauma maybe felt like too much for me. The more memories that returned, the more support I lost. It was like people could handle my truth for a little bit, and then as I continued to process, it became too much. This made it more shameful and isolating. Eventually, I had no support. I was drowning, and there was no one there. I began to seek support from people outside my circle. I needed to find people who understood. So many days I felt insane. But deep down I knew I couldn't have been going crazy for this many years, because though it was extremely painful, in other ways I was feeling better, and I was beginning to love myself. It was liberating. It was also hard, but I knew I was on the right path, even if my outside world made me feel crazy and ashamed. I knew how I felt inside, and that freedom was mine if I was willing to keep venturing down the rabbit hole. I met other rape survivors, and we discussed discernment and how to decide if someone is a safe person to share with. I suffered from PTSD as my repressed memories surfaced, and this kept me in constant pain. I could not handle more pain, so finding safe people became imperative for me in my healing. But with that said, now that I'm on the other side of so much of my pain and not fighting for my life on a daily basis anymore, I can't help but ask, why is it my job to make others comfortable with my story? Where is the compassion and love in the aftermath of sexual violence? On the surface, I understand these people's reactions. The times I disclosed and received shame, blame, anger, irritation, disgust, and more, these people were not safe people. They are often wounded themselves and do not have the capacity to be there for others. It's true what they say. You can only love others as much as you love yourself. But by making excuses for people and their lack of compassion and empathy, I ended up domesticating myself. Somewhere along the way, I lost my voice and I caged myself. I only allowed myself to say certain things in certain rooms. I was afraid of making others uncomfortable. I began to water down my story so it was palatable for others. But over time, this became a disservice to me. Why was it my responsibility to make what I survived comfortable for others when it was unbearable for me to survive? One of the hardest parts of healing from trauma and sexual violence was how isolated I felt. I felt like I was being punished and forced into solitary confinement because someone did something horrible to me. This feeling of isolation caused me to blame myself for years. But again, looking back, I can't help but ask why, as the victim of a crime, was I the one who felt locked up? The hard truth for so much of this is that no one prepares anyone for the aftermath of sexual violence. I sure as hell was not prepared, and I know neither were the people in my life. No one knows what to say or how to act, and many times that leads to inaction. But I look back and I didn't need much. I needed empathy and compassion. And it was hard and sometimes impossible to come by. If I could tell someone supporting a survivor something today, it would be that it's okay to not know what to say. I don't think you're supposed to have the right thing to say, but I know I'm not alone in feeling like I ended up in a hellish prison. What would have helped me is someone climbing into prison with me and saying a version of, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. I know how hard this is for you, and I'm so sorry. You did not deserve this. It was not your fault. I can't tell you how many times I've had to be the one to say that to myself. My prayer for the future is that people can get more comfortable with being uncomfortable. I used to wonder when I would feel like an adult, and recently I realized I may never have that adult moment. But to me, being an adult is taking responsibility, and many times that's learning how to navigate discomfort rather than fight it or run from it. I'm no longer afraid of making people uncomfortable. I don't care how you feel about my story. You're uncomfortable? Good, because it was really uncomfortable to survive. It's not supposed to be comfortable. That's why it's trauma. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Reflections and for listening to me reflect on how other people's uncomfortability was an unexpected, really difficult thing for me to process throughout my healing journey. When, as I said in the story, the truth is, it was really uncomfortable for me. And I don't think sexual violence is ever supposed to be comfortable. I know that I have been in many groups with survivors, and it's a topic we often talk about, how there's not many places where people are empathetic and compassionate to survivors of sexual violence. And there is no roadmap for surviving sexual violence. It's a very painful process. And I hope that this story was maybe helpful for someone, or maybe somebody feels less alone and thinks, oh my God, that's how I've felt before. Because as always, my intention with these stories is to help one person feel less alone. I believe every life matters, and your life matters, my life matters. And I look back on my journey and I realized there were so many moments that I needed to know that my life mattered. And I was not met with compassion, empathy, and that would have made a world of difference. And as I'm sharing here, I'm also reminded that what that means, that empathy and compassion that I was looking for, it really means I needed somebody to recognize my humanity, and that I was a human on the other side of this painful experience that was making them incredibly uncomfortable. And I think sometimes recognizing the humanity in one another is a small act of kindness that can make a world of difference. And a lot of times, some of those hard conversations are going to be uncomfortable, but they're important. And they can lead to more intimacy, more vulnerability, and more love between people. So with that, thank you so much for listening. I invite you to give this video a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, or give the podcast 5 stars if you're on Spotify or Apple. Thank you so much for listening. I am sending you so much love wherever you are in the world, and I will see you next time.